Facebook. Hopefully you come to YouTube or TikTok, because that phone is dead. All right. Let me get the morning started. All right. So, what were we talking about yesterday? Yesterday we were talking about visas and permits and the differences between them. Um, Today let's talk about making the move worthwhile, right? Making the move the best move that you can possibly make for you, right? Um, and so, what you want to be aware of is that when you make a relocation jump, like our clients do to Kenya, the ones that do that, you want to make sure that that relocation jump does the best thing it can possibly do for your family overall. You want those plans in place, right? You don't want to wing it. You don't want to vibes it. You don't want to manifest it, right? You want to make sure that you have your planning in place and that you're doing the best possible thing that you can be doing for your family or your future plans, whatever that might be. So the planning is the first step. Figuring out what you want is the first step. Once you figure out what you want, then you can figure out how to achieve it. Right? Then you can figure out, like, all right, I know what I want. How do I plan towards the thing that I want? That's easy. All right. If you do it the opposite direction, you'll be doing it for years and not going anywhere. We see a lot of that, right? Um, there's one specific guy that comes to the top of my mind every time I think about this, who's literally been following me for years. And when I say years, he's been following me since MySpace. And he can never get it together what he wants to do. So he follows and like he copies certain things. You know, he sees something, he'll try to copy it or whatever. He'll fail miserably. And he's been doing this since MySpace. So he's been doing this for, I don't know, even 20 years, right? Because he has no clear goal. He allows social media to create the goals for him, right? And he locks on to certain people. I'm sure I'm not the only one that he's been following like that, but he locks on to certain people that sound like they're, moving in the direction that he wants to move, but he does not have his own clear set of goals, right? So years and years and years, we did something about coat of arms for our family constitution clients. And a coat of arms has to be granted by a heraldic authority, right? So as people who are, interested in that, as they go through that process, we start introducing them to authorities, and eventually an authority grants their arms. Okay. So we were going through that, talking that through, showing how you utilize it as part of your generational wealth strategy, not just to have a coat of arms or some pretty little picture of the blah, 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 right? So we have these workshops that we do where we bring people through their entire family constitution situation, and then by the end of it, typically they do have a coat of arms and all that stuff. So same guy, been following since, MySpace, ends up like emailing one of our employees like this coat of arms that he set up that he's trying to follow the path, but he doesn't have a clear goal at the end, right? So he's going through all of these motions, and with no clear goal at the end. That's actually the target client for things like Amway, right? The people that'll go through the motions and buy business cards and say they're business owners and never do any of the work that it takes to do anything in business. That's the absolute target client for like a Mary Kay and Amway, one of those kind of network marketing situations, is that type of person, right? That type of person sometimes happens by accident, though. We like to lean in and be like, oh, yeah, they're not doing anything. They should work harder. They should X, Y, and Z. Sometimes it happens because they don't understand how to problem solve out life, right? And so problem solving out life has to start with a goal and go backwards, right? So you start with whatever the goal is and you move backwards. And that way you can identify which service providers are correct for you. Hi, Cider. So which providers are correct for you will make themselves apparent if you start with the goal and work backwards. All right. So when you're doing your relocation stuff, always figure out why it is you're relocating. It doesn't have to be one thing. It can be complex. right? It can be 10 things. It can be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But then figure out what success looks like, right? So if you successfully relocate, or you successfully expand your business into an international situation in another country, what does that actually look like? If you successfully create generational wealth for your family, what does that look like? What does you achieving that look like in your mind? And then work backwards from there to figure out what is it that I need to have in place in order to get to that achievement, right? For me, the goal was always generational wealth, which has nothing to do with my personal wealth, right? If you're doing true generational wealth planning, the generational wealth planning does not affect your personal wealth, right? Those people are lying to themselves and copping out. If their generational wealth goal is I'm going to get rich and then I'm going to leave everything to the next generation, then their plan is the worst possible plan, statistically speaking, that they could have ever come up with, right? So my focus was always generational wealth, which only benefits a future generation, right? If you go back and you look at all the the most wealthy families, right, the old money, old guard, you'll see that the patriarch of every single one of those families died broke, right? From the Kennedys to the Rothschilds to the Rockefellers, the patriarch of each and every one of those families died broke. They made just enough to position the next generation to start the dynasty, right? Some of them died illiterate and broke, right? When you go to the Rothschilds and they have a banking empire, the patriarch was like a shoe cobbler that couldn't write and could barely count. But he put away just enough to send the son to school to become the banker who created the banking dynasty that we all think about when we say the word Rothschild, right? And so that's the way it works. Now, like I said, things can be more than one thing at the same time. So you can have your own wealth plan in place and your generational wealth plan in place and be operating both of them at the same time. Because generational wealth is actually easy. I was flabbergasted how easy it was when I started doing it, right? Because generational wealth simply requires time. All that generational wealth requires on the finance side is compounding. The complicated side is making sure that the generations that you're leaving the wealth to know how to deal with it. So that's the education side of it. And you don't need to have that education, right? But like the Rothschilds, patriarch did not have any education. He couldn't read and could barely count, right? But you can still set up parameters in your generational wealth planning that says, okay, I don't know how to do it, but in order for my next generation to access what I'm leaving them, they have to know how to do it, right? And then, so that's why we use a trust system. You don't have to use a trust system for generational wealth, but a trust system legally binds a trustee into doing what you need done, right? And typically those trustees are actually lawyers or law firms, right? Corporate trustees are typically full of lawyers. And so what ends up happening is you essentially write out your trust deed and it says, all right, listen, I'm leaving, and it doesn't have to be much. Check this out. I'm leaving $1,000. Okay. I'm leaving $1,000 and I'm leaving it in an offshore trust. We do Kenya for a generational wealth trust. So I'm doing an offshore trust in Kenya. I'm putting $1,000 in it. That's it. Right. Half of a U.S. tax return. I want that $1,000 to compound in X amount of ways, right? We have a fund. There's a Kenyan fund that we invested for a trust client last February. That Kenyan fund did an ROI of 60%. After paying for the performance fee from the fund manager, it's still an ROI of 40%. You couldn't get that from Berkshire Hathaway right now in the United States, right? So crazy stuff, right? But that's all you need is time and compounding, right? So that $1,000, you throw that in there. It's compounding for the next 60 years, right? Because who's the target of your generational wealth, right? The target might be your grandkids. A lot of people do that. They don't target their kids, they target their grandkids, right? So that's 60 years. That's 60 years of that $1,000 compounding year after year at whatever percent, right? Typically more than 10, right? So right now, for example, we had a lot of our clients got lucky, and they got in on a Kenyan infrastructure bond last February that has a guaranteed government return on investment of 18.46% for the next 20 years. That means every 3 years their money doubles. So if they put 100 in 3 years and 4 months, if you want to do exact math, but in 3 years, that 100 becomes 200, right? Same thing happens with 10,000 though. The more money you start with, the better off and the faster it is. But that $100, given enough time, will become $1,000,000. The same way $100,000 will become $1,000,000. It just won't take as long, right? And so every 3 years, that money's doubling, right? And those lawyers have to manage it. And those lawyers only get paid a percentage of the money that they make you, right? So when that money doubles, okay, they might get 6% of the doubling. That's fine, right? Somebody's managing this thing for you, they get paid, right? So that's how that works. That's why it's so ridiculously easy. That's why it's so absurd that we don't all have it set up for our children, because it's a once and done situation. You don't have to keep paying. Is it better if you keep paying? Yes, of course it is. The more money you put into it, the faster things happen, the better it is. So if you can say, okay, $100 a month to at that point, you ain't got to do grandkids anymore, right? Now you can do kids, right? Now by the time your kids are grown, there's going to be a substantial amount of money in that generational wealth trust, right? That's been compounding for the last 20 years, right? But if you keep adding money to it, that now you can use either a closer family. We have grandparents that they'll do their grandkids, but it's like kids because it's still only like 18 years. Like the kids were just born, right? So like their grandkids were just born. They're on their way out the door. They maybe have a little bit more liquid income than they need, and so they do like a lump sum. Like we've had grandparents that come in and like, all right, 20 grand, start with 20 grand, move from there, and so we had some people that were able to do that with that Kenyan tax exempt infrastructure bond. So they put in 20 grand at a guaranteed 18.46%, right? Again, every 3 years and like 4 months, that's going to double, right? So that 40 grand already, and then the next doubling is going to be 80 grand. And then the next doubling, $160,000 off of their 20 grand, right? That's only, 12 years down the road. So, and that's a tax exempt bond, right? And they don't have to pay taxes on it because it's not theirs. They gave it to the trust, which they're not the trustee of. It can't be a grantor trust. So they gave it to the trust. The law firm is the trustee of the trust. They wrote out the trust document that binds what the law firm can legally do and can't do within that trust. And when the kids come of age, their kids will be given, whatever percentage of what's in that trust. Lump sums don't work out too well, so we never recommend that. But they'll be distributed, the funds in that trust, however they've been ordered to distribute it by that trust document, right? So what ends up happening is, as long as that money is compounding, which by the way, if you go study like the greats in investing, like Warren Buffett has said numerous times, it will not be hard to find it on a Google search, that he is not smart, at all. All he does is invest in, the stock market at large and hold it. Literally his entire strategy has been compounding this entire time, right? Just holds it. He lets the crashes happen. He lets the dips happen. When the dips happen, he buys more, and just holds it, and he lets it compound over time. And in the end, he's arguably the greatest investor that ever lived, right? Just by holding it. So that's all you do for generational wealth, right? And so because that was my focus, number one, Kenya became a very, very easy target country for me because my focus was building generational wealth for the family, right? So the fact that Kenya's family trust allows for 10 million to be distributed per beneficiary per year, tax-free, again made it a no-brainer as to whether or not Kenya was the right place for me to go, with my focus being generational wealth for the family. Because that was my focus, it made it very, very easy to choose Kenya as the place to go. Make sense? All right. Any questions about generational wealth? Sorry about that. Had to be. Any questions about generational wealth? Albrez, you're on the YouTube side. I'm not sure I would know how to DM you later. Just go ahead and throw me a DM and I'll respond to it. YouTube is typically handled by our social media manager, so I don't really see. If you guys are speaking to me on YouTube, it's better to just email me, or just wait for the feedback. It's not like the social media manager doesn't give me messages. It's just you're last in line. Make it sound like money comes out of thin air. Yeah, it does. Yep. Yep. I know the idea of that, especially in America, we try to act like money can't come out of thin air. And unfortunately, in our community, there's this prevailing lie that things only count when you get them out the mud or get them out the dirt and blah, 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 blah. Right? You hear that in black communities in some iteration or another, right? Where I'm from, they used to say, get it out the dirt. And I went down south and they say, get it out the mud, and all of this nonsense, right? So there's this idea that you only make legitimate money if you break your back to make it, which is bullshit, right? You can never outwork money. Money will always outwork you. There's no way for you to do more than money can do, right? So this get it out the mud nonsense, it's a lie that has positioned our people poorly over time. And so you got to get past that idea that money doesn't come out of thin air, because it does. It's a token of value, right? Money means nothing. We literally print it. We literally print it out of thin air. That piece of currency you're holding is a token of value, right? It's supposed to indicate that there's something valuable that's taking place somewhere, and you have equity in that valuable thing. All right. So when it comes to governmental currency, it means that you have equity in that government, and the government is valuable, and you're trading that value amongst each other with these little pieces of paper, right? That's backed in the trust of whatever that thing is that has value, right? It's the exact same way corporations work, right? The day before one corporation gets a $1 trillion valuation, that $1 trillion didn't exist. It wasn't even part of the global economy. Right? Once that evaluation hits and they say, hey, there's this much value in this organization, that value is created out of nowhere and converted into currency out of nowhere, right? Like a battery, absolutely. Hey, good to see you, man. Absolutely, like a battery. So that is the way it works. It's out of thin air. That's absolutely correct. You just have to understand that that's the way it works, or else it feels like it's some type of scam. But yeah, no, as long as you find out, the hard part is, of course, finding what's going to give you the good ROI, right? And so capital preservation comes from diversification. So being involved in a bunch of, good things, or things that look pretty good, that you've done your due diligence on, is a strategy of capital preservation, all right? So there's that, right? If all your eggs are in one basket, yes, you can be wiped out, of course, right? That's the risk of all investments. But generational wealth is absurdly easy in that it just takes time. We're kind of even seeing it, like even the kids kind of get it, which is interesting right now, right? Because I in my firm, I've been doing this for over a decade, and it used to be that the kids just didn't get it, and then your older guys really, really understood it. Well, now the older guys are senile guys, right? And there's a group of people in the middle who manifest everything, and then there's the kids. And the kids understand that at one point in time, Bitcoin was $1. And now Bitcoin is, whatever, $40,000, right? So they understand that over time, valuable things can compound, right? So the kids actually get it better than the adults currently, currently, right? So, so that's definitely one of the things that you want to, kind of have in mind is that if you're doing generational wealth, it just takes time. It can't be something that you think you're going to buy into now and get tomorrow. Thanks for doing these lives, learning so much, feeling less intimidated, moving East Africa. Yeah, man. Yeah, definitely. East Africa is incredible in terms of development, right? So in terms of development, in terms of access to technology, fintech in particular, Kenya is incredible. Their entire population believes in fintech, which is awesome. That can't be said for any other country that I've dealt with, except maybe China. So, but not the USA, that's for daggone sure. Not any West African countries, that's for sure. But Kenyans understand fintech, trust fintech, use fintech daily, and have not had any giant fintech scandals, right? Fintech hasn't failed them. So for people who always kind of lean into corruption this and corruption that, I mean, that would have been the easiest source of corruption would have been to create a fintech scandal and then just call it a just steal everybody's money because everybody is invested in it. The entire country uses fintech. Most people, their entire paycheck and their life savings is on their phone. That ain't happening in America. You know what I mean? A couple years ago, people couldn't even take money out the Nigerian ATM. The government shut it down, right? But most people here are completely cool with all of their money and their paychecks going into their cell phone, right? So it's a very different mentality, and especially if you're doing business and you're doing business in a way that's going to rely on technology, it's a great place to be. So how do you make sure that I think you're trying to say descendants there, receive, oh, so how do you make sure that the descendants receive the financial literacy is what you're saying, right? Um, and if that's not what you're saying, just whatever you wrote is illegible, so just let me know. But if if the control about what happens with the money that you create is dictated by a document called a trust deed. Okay, the trust deed is created by you. Right now, if you're working with us, we'll help you create it. Okay, because you might not know how to create a trust deed. In fact, I'm sure you don't. Right, so we would help you create it. That would be part of like our service. We do not manage the trust. The Diaspora Freedom Initiative does not manage the trust. Right, there is a trustee company that all they do is trust and generational wealth related stuff. They manage the trust. All right. So the trustee company is a Kenyan company. They manage the trust. That's actually important. It's a Kenyan company that has no U.S. employees. That's important for tax purposes, right? Because if you can control the trust, we do have clients that they control their trust. But as soon as you do that, it is now illegal for you not to report that trust to the IRS, to file taxes on that trust and file a bunch of additional documentation when you do your taxes every single year, because it's now a grantor trust. So if you want to understand more about that and the tax implications, then you need to speak to either your CPA or just go to irs.gov and in the search bar, put in their non-grantor trust, grantor trust, and read what the differences are, right? In a non-grantor trust, you do not have to tell the government anything, right? And the government tells you that, go to irs.gov, put it in the search bar, it'll come right up. You don't have to make any reports to the government until a distribution from that trust goes to a U.S. person, or a U.S. person or company is like managing the trust or whatever, right? So what ends up happening a lot of times, like with these grandparents doing the stuff for their grandkids, they set up the trust compounds over time. The U.S. government doesn't even know it's there legally, Nobody, except for the beneficiary and the family, maybe know that it's there. You will get like reports, like you'll get like, hey, like almost like a quarterly earnings report. Like, yeah, this is where the trust is at. You can log in and like see where the trust is at. You get a login and all that stuff, And there may be things in the trust deed that allow you to make inquiries of the trust, and all of that stuff. However, largely there's no control, because if there's control, you can be ordered to execute that control on behalf of somebody else, right? So if there's control, a judge can order you to liquidate the trust to pay your debts, which have nothing to do with the beneficiary, your grandkids. You get in a car accident, someone slides down your steps because you didn't get the ice off quickly enough and all of that stuff. All of that stuff leaves it open to you, which is also the reason why we don't do domestic trusts. A lot of people are like, oh, why can't I just do a trust in New York where I live? You can. And then a New York state judge can tell you that that trust is dissolved and do a court order and freeze the bank accounts and pull out the money and, give it to the person who sued you for, the fender bender, right? So yeah, you can. It's just not protected. When it's an offshore trust and it's non-grantor, it's protected. It's not yours at all. Even if you're ordered, right? Even if somebody says, you know what? I don't believe that it's not grantor as a judge, which is crazy. But let's just say the judge is crazy enough to do that. I don't believe it. I think it's grantor, and I'm ordering you to dissolve that trust and give this person who, slid down your steps, all the money that's in the trust, $1 million judgment for a lawsuit. Well, now you would call up the trustee that's not American and not in America, and you would say, hey, I want to dissolve the trust and take all the money out and use it for whatever I want to use it for. And the trustee would say, okay, cool. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. And swear you in, right, under penalty of perjury, and say, okay, are you under duress? Or have you been ordered by a foreign court to dissolve this trust, right? No court or judge can order you to perjure yourself. So you say, yeah, I've been ordered by the judge to dissolve this trust. The trustee would then immediately deny your request. And then you would go back to the court and you would say, listen, I was ordered to request a distribution. I requested the distribution. The trust said no. I followed the court order. And the money's protected overseas. The judge can't, at that point in time, just step in and seize what's there because he has no jurisdiction. That's the whole point, right? So now the trust has to be designed that way. Trusts don't just do that, right? But they have to be designed that way so that they protect the legacy that's being left. And again, it has to be honest. It can't be benefiting you. It has to be a generational wealth trust that's really set up for the next generation. You do not benefit from what's in the generational wealth trust. You got to wrap your head around doing what's best for the kids doesn't benefit you, physically, directly. Like maybe sometimes it does in the sense of like you need elder care. You don't set your kids up to be millionaires. Probably makes sense that they would pay for you to go to an old folks home, right? So as long as there's the right level of familial responsibility there, you might benefit that way. But it's not a piggy bank. It's not your piggy bank, that's for sure, right? So just make sure that part is being honest. People get jammed up when they think that they can play games with words and that'll work out, with authorities. Most authorities have something called form over function doctrine, right? The IRS definitely has form over function doctrine. And again, you can go to IRS.gov and look that up. And essentially what that says is if you can figure out some clever little wordsmithing, well, technically, Your Honor, I did this. The form over function doctrine is going to say, yeah, okay, fine. You found some little technical way around it, but in essence, you're still committing this crime, which is already on the books, this embezzlement or this tax evasion or this whatever, right? It's not a new crime. It's not, I feel like I need to get you for this. It's no, form over function. The function of the thing that you're doing is still giving you the effect of, this crime, and therefore you're guilty of it. So they don't really, play around. They don't leave. People talk about loopholes. There really are no loopholes. There's just laws. And if you follow the laws appropriately in such a way that it benefits you, then fine. but there really aren't loopholes, and a lot of loopholes are closed with form over function doctrines, right? And sometimes they have different names, but if you Google form over function doctrine, it'll come up. And so that allows them to just say, listen, it doesn't matter how cleverly you set this up to make it seem like it's legit. The function of it is the same as this illegal thing, and therefore it's treated the same, and that's it, period. So all the little court TV bullshit, and all the other nonsense that you see, the sovereign citizen foolishness and all that. The reason why none of it works is because there's essentially a catch-all doctrine that as long as the outcome is the same as this thing that's illegal over here, it's treated as that illegal thing. So do it right. That's it. Just do it right. It's not that hard. Same thing with immigration. We run into that all the time, right? We run into people like, oh, I'm just going to get a visa and I'm going to stay 90 days and then extend the visa and then I'm going to run over the border and then I'm going to run back and then I'm going to just do it right. Because eventually what's going to happen is you're going to go over the border. Your family, your funds, your bank accounts, and everything's going to be here because you've been doing this nonsense, this illegal immigration for the last 6 years. You're going to try to come back, and the immigration officer is finally going to stop you. Are you illegally living here on a tourist visa? It looks like every 6 months for the last 6 years, you've been going back and forth. Bet you got a real nice bank account that we can freeze. Bet you got a car that we can civil asset forfeiture. Bet you got some family members that love you that'll pay to get you out of jail. Let's go ahead and test those theories, right? All because you wanted to find a loophole, right? So just do it the right way and the legal way, and you'll be fine. Yeah, Ty, we were actually talking about that yesterday. Visas only grant you access to a country. They do not permit you to act within that country, right? So you need a permit, right? Like there's a B1 visa, right? You take a B1 visa, B2 visa, it lets you in the United States, right? From there, you can adjust your status and try to get a permit, right? A green card. A green card is a residency permit. You can attempt that. But the visa simply allows you in the United States. Even sometimes when you adjust your status, they'll say you have to adjust your status in your home country, right? So you need something called advance parole a lot of times in order to adjust your status in the country that you entered legally with the visa, right? Because now you're adjusting your status and you're moving possibly from a non-immigrant status to an immigrant status, right? So these things are virtually universal. Not everybody calls it green card. Not everybody calls all the permits the same thing and all that. These things are virtually universal. Sometimes there's some confusion in countries that do link them. Like there are some countries that'll say, okay, if you get this visa, then you automatically have a temporary permit. And that's where some confusion comes in. But visas allow access to a country. They do not give you an immigration status. Permits give you an immigration status, even if it's temporary. That's a different type of permit, but yeah, that's allowed here as well. We actually have a lot of clients that come here because of their Second Amendment guys in the U.S. And they're sportsmen, like they go practicing every weekend and all of that stuff. And yes, Kenya is a place where you can bring your firearms, and with your firearm permit, you can convert that firearm permit to a Kenyan firearm permit. So our law firm does that quite often. So that's a deciding factor for a lot of sportsmen. What I do like, though, with the Kenyan safari scene versus some of the South African safaris is you can't go out there and unalive animals, right? So that's not part of Kenyan safari. But you can be a sportsman and you can, have a firearms permit. You can conceal carry. Most of the people who do it, it's just a matter of that they've done it so long. We get a lot of folks from like Philly and stuff, which Pennsylvania's an open carry state, and they've just carried for so long that they feel like it's just something they have to do everywhere. And like within a year, they stop open carrying here or not even open carrying, concealed carrying here, because it's just not that dangerous. But they still have the right to. So yeah, some of those things, if we build a bit of our identity around them, some of those things are things that like we're definitely looking for. Not every country allows that, but Kenya, you can get that kind of permit, even though that's not the permit I was talking about. You can get a firearms permit and concealed carry. That's something that's fairly easy to do if you plan for it in advance. And if you have one, like if you qualify for a permit now, yeah, fairly easy to do. If you're a felon, same type of situation where you may not qualify. Out of left field question, but I guess it was a good one. All right. Anything else on how to figure out where to go, what to do? We kind of got into how to build a solid family foundation as well. Really, your first step there, like the trust and all of that stuff, is the last thing, right? It's something that is like a product that our firm offers, so we talk about it from that regard. But a lot of times people will come to us, as you guys who've been following us the longest know, we don't just take people money, right? So a lot of folks will come to us and we'll send them away because they're not ready, or we'll send them into a workshop to become ready, right? And so the trust is the final thing. What you need, unless you're a grandparent just trying to take care of like your grandkids, and that's a little bit different, right? But if you're trying to build a full-on family, the trust is the last thing. The very first thing is the family constitution. That's the first thing. Figuring out what the family stands for, figuring out what the goals of the family are, and those goals need to be loose. It can't be your goal projected on the family. It needs to be loose enough that the family can follow the goal, and yet the individual family members can still go be doctors, lawyers, lesbians, dancers, whatever they want to be, right? So it can't be so stringent that all of a sudden being in your family is the equivalent of being in a prison. And it can't be so loose that it means nothing at all, right? So getting all of that set, and the biggest part of that is a conflict resolution, right? Your article of conflict resolution in your family constitution is the most important article, and we found that out by accident. We found that out just by clients over the years coming back to us and like thanking us with tears in their eyes, right? Conflict resolution is absolutely the most important part of the family constitution. All right. People who have a family constitution do not have situations where, we ain't spoke to Bobby in 10 years. Why? I don't know. I forget what he did, but it was bad. We don't talk to him no more. We don't talk to that side of the family no more. That doesn't happen when you have a conflict resolution plan in place in your family constitution, because everybody understands how to deal with conflict. And it doesn't matter how big the conflict is. We had some grandparents who had set up their family constitution come to us and say that one of the cousins slept with, one of the grandkids' wife, and the conflict resolution system in the family constitution allowed them to get through that in a couple of months. And they're still family, like they're still working towards their goal. Family is still doing what's supposed to be doing. They're still, building generational wealth. It didn't fracture the family because they understood how to handle this. There's punishment within the family, like that person lost certain family shares. They lost access to certain things for a certain amount of time, and they can earn it back, right? But it allowed for it not to devolve into this, ugliness of we just don't talk to them. That's the horrible part of the family. We don't deal with them no more. Blah 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 blah. And then now what? How does that help your children? How does that help your grandchildren? How does that help your family build dynasty? It doesn't. Right. So the most important part of that family constitution is the conflict resolution articles, and the conflict resolution articles have to be something that everybody knows, right? And it has to be unbiased, and so it has to be written in such a way that no matter if it's the favorite kid from the family, if they F up, they find out, right? And that's when your trustee, not being you, and your trustee being a trustee corporation full of lawyers, really ends up mattering, because those lawyers will implement that punishment. Doesn't matter how much you love little Johnny messed up, and according to the trust deed, the conflict resolution system has to play out, and then once the conflict resolution system pays out, these are the possible remedies. for a guilty verdict, so to speak. And then the lawyers will implement those remedies, no matter how much the people in the family like that person, and that'll be the end of it, right? And so that keeps things fair. And when things are fair, the family works together. When things are not fair, then people start feeling resentment and, oh, he's the favorite. He can do whatever he wants. Grandma always protects him. They always bail him out. Da, 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 da. You want to get rid of that if you're going to have, a real family that's going to operate on an elite level, right? And so, like, when you look at like really, really, really high scale families, like in most recently, even the royal family, right? When you look at like how that thing played out with Harry, and Harry having a solid amount of favoritism from the Queen, there were things in place within that family that even though she led the family, she couldn't necessarily override. And so that's what you want. You want it to be like, look, this is what it is. And based on our values and our goals, this is what's going to happen every time somebody breaks with that tradition, and they can go start their own thing. You know what I mean? Like if it's that much of a thing and that much of a break, they can go start their own family, because now you've already given them the building blocks of how to do that, right? And so, like for us, my branch of the family is referred to as the JM lineage, right? There are other lineages, in my family. But my branch is the JM lineage, and we have our own family constitution, and we have our own breakdown, we have our own coat of arms, we have whatever, and that's that. So as the family grows, you can definitely end up having offshoots happen. There's what is her name? She starts with an S. There's a offshoot of the Kennedy family. Actually, Arnold Schwarzenegger was married to one. Her last name isn't Kennedy, but she's a Kennedy, right? And so when you go follow the family tree, you'll see these families, they'll have, especially because of marriage, right, and people taking names and all that stuff, they'll end up having these branches that offshoot. And those branches can create their own family trusts, and those branches can create, their own family constitutions. And then the matriarch or patriarch of that family is typically funded by the previous trust, because they're the last member of that family, right? Because once they get married and they change their name, it's now this other family. And so the children coming out of that may not, depending on how the trust was created, qualify for that trust anymore. So they use their trust proceeds to go ahead and start a new one. Even if they do qualify, like one of my family trusts, every descendant of me qualifies, period. Doesn't matter what their name becomes, right? They do have to prove that they're descendants, which is typically done by DNA at birth. But as long as they're a descendant of mine, they qualify, right? So in that situation, it doesn't matter what happens with the names. Going down the line, all of them will have access to distributions from that trust as long as they're related to. But you can have generational trust where it's only a certain amount of generations, and then the trust dissolves and dumps into a company that's owned by the trust, right? So you can do anything that makes sense to you, but the point is you got to start strong. So you have to start with the family constitution. You have to start with that family knowing what it's about, knowing what it wants to accomplish, and moving forward from there. That makes sense to everybody? Anybody got a question on that? You don't know what happens when the coffee gets low. That's when the live ends. Any questions on any of that? Yes, I do have a construction crew renovating. I didn't realize you could hear that. Yes. No, so your family's a company. That's what it should be. And it should be handled that way, right? There should be a company budget. There should be quarterly performance. I have a payroll for my household every month. A certain amount of money gets paid to the people who work here, right? So that's what should be happening, right? And then you can judge the health of the family by the same metrics that you judge, or the financial health anyway, by the same metrics that you would judge any other company. Yeah, definitely. And well, it helps you take care of everything, right? Because if you're treating it as a company, right, it's not just payroll, right? There's also benefits, including health benefits, right? So now the insurance is taken care of on the same spreadsheet. I mean, your profit and loss as a family is looked at on the same spreadsheet. You can tell if the family is spending too much. You can tell if the family isn't saving enough. You can tell if the family trust needs to match retirement investments, right? So all of those things now are things that you look at, which a lot of people just ignore. They just wing it. You know, oh, I got money for investment, so I'll do it. I don't have money for insurance, so nobody has it. The kids have welfare insurance, blah, 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 blah. Yet everybody got 5 pairs of Jordans, right? It's because nobody has a spreadsheet and nobody's operating as though the family is a company. And that's exactly what it should be treated as. Good question, though. I tell you what, YouTube, this is the 5th day in a row that you guys are asking all the questions. It's real quiet on TikTok side. I did not expect that. I expected YouTube to not be as active as TikTok. I guess I was wrong. All right, anything else? Any other questions? Oh, you were looking at both? Yeah, YouTube has some kind of feature where it zooms in on my face. So you're correct. It does look different on the YouTube side. TikTok, do you recommend an irrevocable trust? So your offshore trust is typically... All right, so irrevocable and revocable trusts are language that we use in most of the Western world to describe what kind of trust you're dealing with. Now, if you counted them all out, you could get to a number of like 78 different types of trusts and all that. But in the end, when you break them all down, there's only really 3 types of trust. People say 2, but that's not true. There's really 3 types of trust. There's irrevocable trust, there's a revocable trust, and there's a testamentary trust. All right? Now, that only matters to your taxing authority, whether it's called an irrevocable or revocable trust, right? And there's probably some tests to figure out what it actually is. Typically, an offshore trust is going to be irrevocable, typically. However, the reason why people lean into offshore trusts is because there are jurisdictions offshore that will allow you to operate an irrevocable trust like a revocable one, right? Which is a beautiful thing, right? However, some courts are very well known with these jurisdictions. Cook Islands is one of them. So if you look up judgments, which you can do on Google actually, so if you look up judgments where trusts were penetrated, you'll start seeing a couple phrases over and over and over again, especially when it comes to Cook Islands trusts. And you'll start seeing judges that say, because the trust structure has privileges above and beyond what is available domestically, that they're not seeing that trust as an irrevocable trust anymore, right? So there's stuff like that. And they try to penetrate those things all the time. If you create them properly, you can't do it. But the terminology on a general level makes sense. It's good to, is this revocable, is this irrevocable, da, 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 da. But as you get a little bit deeper, it stops mattering. And what starts mattering is jurisprudence, right? And so jurisprudence is kind of like jurisdiction, all right? But jurisprudence is going to control the working mechanics of whatever legal mechanism you're using that is bound to that jurisdiction, right? So that's what you're really going to want to look into. So what you're really looking for is, amongst the offshore trusts, which ones are the best ones for what I'm doing, right? For generational wealth, we always use Kenya, but we don't use Kenya for asset protection, right? So for asset protection under $50 million, we use the Seychelles. For asset protection over $50 million, we use Mauritius because the jurisprudences are different, right? For asset protection in specific markets, we might use Singapore or Hong Kong, right? For a large family office, we use Singapore. For small family office, we could use Kenya, all right? But we'll probably use Seychelles. So it really depends on what it is that you're looking for, and what the end result is going to be, and whether it's domestic or whether it's international, right? If it's domestic, irrevocable trusts might be good. It's just that you would need to, the goal matters. Because once you do an irrevocable trust, you no longer own it. Doesn't mean that your will doesn't guide it. A lot of people will say, oh, you don't own it, but you control it. Well, now you got a problem. Because if you control it, then that means your creditors can take it from you, right? But your will, which is the trust document, right, which is called a trust deed, when you write the trust deed, you're telling the trustee, which if it's a irrevocable trust in the United States and you're not connected to it, so it's non-grantor, then the trustee is typically a lawyer, right? So that lawyer can only do what the trust deed says. Now, here's the problem with that. I'll give you a real example. We had a client that came to us from Maryland, and they had an irrevocable trust in Maryland that handled all of their rental properties. And then the money from the rental properties was supposed to pay for the kids' college in the future. They wrote their own trust deed instead of going to a professional. And so what they wanted was now an umbrella trust offshore to come in and kind of assume trustee status over the previous trust. What ended up happening was, as they wrote in all the things to get the rent and to make sure that they can do the maintenance on the property and the background checks, and they got all that down, what they forgot to put in the trust deed was when someone doesn't pay you, you evict them. So someone didn't pay. And the lawyers were like, I don't have the authority to evict. You didn't put that in the trust deed. And they very quickly spread the word that for some reason, this landlord can't evict us. So everyone stopped paying. Took 2 years to validate the trust because it's irrevocable. So a judge has to revoke it now. So it took 2 years to revoke the trust. In those 2 years, those people living there free, not paying a dime, right? And then after the trust was revoked, all of those properties snapped back into their ownership, which looked like they just got a whole bunch of money, $2 million worth of properties just snapped back into their name from the trust. So now the IRS wants a piece of that capital gain, even though there was no real capital gain. So now you got to go to court with the IRS. Right. And so by the time it was done, them people had lived there for 3 years free before they were even able to evict them. So there goes all the kids' college money that just got ate up because they wrote an irrevocable trust without a professional's help. So irrevocable trusts are nothing to play with. Revocable trusts, play with them all day. Like if you want to learn trusts and you feel like you want to do it yourself trust, then no problem. But just make sure it's revocable, and then you can just wipe it out, and then that's that. Revocable trusts do not grant asset protection. Anyone who says that is a liar. Period. There is no loophole. There is no way around it. There is no special island off the coast of Virginia. If it is a revocable trust, there is no asset protection. A judge can just order you to revoke it. Period. Okay? But you can definitely play with revocable trust and just figure out like how trusts work. But yeah, lean on the professional. It'll cost you a lot because irrevocable trusts are designed not to be broken. They're a tool that's designed to be immortal, essentially. So when you mess them up, it's a problem. It's a problem. Yeah. Your international, like your offshore trusts are typically less complicated. And sometimes they even fall into their own category, so they're even less complicated than the domestic trusts in that jurisprudence, right? So like Mauritius, for example, they have something called Mauritius. It's a GBC, stands for Global Business Corporation. The GBC has a special tax rate. I think it's like 1.5%. And you can only have a GBC if you don't do business in Mauritius, even though the company is registered there. Seychelles has the same thing. It's just called an IBC. Their tax rate is 0%, though. But same thing, you cannot do business in the Seychelles and have a Seychelles IBC, right? So there are all types of strategies that can be implemented, where you might have a Seychelles IBC that's owned by a Seychelles offshore trust, which has a lot of the same benefits, right? As long as the trust doesn't own anything in the Seychelles, right? And so what ends up happening in these situations with the offshore trust is, even if there is a judgment against you and that judgment somehow attaches itself to the trust, which the easiest way to do that is when these idiots tell people to put their cars in their trust. It's easy, absolute easiest way. You get a ticket on your car, your trust is now in jeopardy because the trust owns the car. You get an offender bender, your trust is now in jeopardy because the trust owns the car. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and so many people on this internet tell people to do it. Nothing litigious should be owned by the trust. It shouldn't be a car where you're driving down the street and it hits a stone and kicks the stone out the back tire, and that person happens to have a dash cam and you break their windshield, and now they have access to $10 million in your trust. That's stupid, right? So anything litigious like that can cause a lawsuit that is not your fault, or that, there's pure ignorance that, of the issue even that caused the lawsuit. Things like cars should not be owned by your trust, right? Now, if you don't want to own them yourself for whatever reason, that's fine. They can be owned by a company that's owned by the trust, right? But that company should be paying out royalties, and that company should be very cash light. So that if anything happens with that company, we've had clients that their company did get sued because the company owned the cars and there was a car accident and whatever. And then the company ended up being dissolved because there's only $5,000 in the company. And it was like a $25,000 judgment with the car accident. So their insurance paid, $15,000 or $20,000, whatever the single collision deductible was. And then there was $5,000 in the company. The courts, took the $5,000 that was in the company, and then closed the company down because there was still a couple $1,000s left, and there was limited liability in place. So they just lost the company, and that's the end of it. You open up another company underneath the trust, and then you're good. But if that car had been owned directly by the trust, all the generational wealth for the kids would have been gone. They've been able to go into that trust and pull it all out. And so even if the trustee doesn't agree, the next step is for the person who got the judgment against you to fly to that jurisdiction and essentially file a judgment against you in that jurisdiction, right? Now, typically it's not worth it to do that, which is why offshore trusts are so effective. It's typically not worth it to fly to that jurisdiction. And certain jurisdictions force foreign complainants to put up sizable bonds, right? Cook Islands is one of those jurisdictions. I think you need $1 million bond to bring a lawsuit in the Cook Islands if you're not from the Cook Islands. So just to file a lawsuit, you got to get them $1 million. And then you can file your lawsuit and see, whether you win or not. You might still lose, you know what I mean? So it just becomes not worth it to do that, which again strengthens the position of the offshore trust. But a lot of just think about some of the stuff that you hear, right? And always consider that ownership equals liability. If you own it, you're liable for it, period. So when somebody tells you to put something that's very litigious, like a car, even a house that's not in the jurisprudence, right? We've seen this multiple times where we told people not to put the house in the offshore trust. They put the house in the offshore trust because some idiot on TikTok told them to do it. And then somebody slides down the steps. And yes, the judge might say, okay, this house needs to come out of this trust, to satisfy the judgment. We need to auction off this house, or the sheriff sale this house. And the foreign trustee can say no. But then the judge will just actually come in and seize the property. Now what? Now the only way to get the property on seize is for the owner to come and claim it. And once the owner comes into the jurisdiction, they can get the entire trust. So the trustee is not flying into the United States jurisdiction to now claim that property, right? So even though it's essentially illegal, there's a period in which the owner can come and claim, like, hey, you can't just take my property. My property has nothing to do with him. But in order for that person to come there, they're now subject to the jurisdiction of where they're standing. So it ends up being a trap, right? So that's why physical property doesn't make sense. Better to put it in a company that's owned by the trust if you need something like that. But there shouldn't be direct paths to your trust. That hurts the strength that you're trying to create around that generational wealth or asset protection. There's multiple reasons to create trust. Sometimes you can even create a trust to qualify for like Medicaid and stuff like that. So there's multiple reasons to create a trust, but the point is you don't want avenues of attack to be open against that trust. So you don't want to put things in that people routinely get sued over in the trust, right? Typically, and again, there's multiple ways to do things and multiple reasons for doing things, so this is not universal, but typically you want your trust to own securities and intellectual property. Is 50,000 capital even worse? Oh yeah. We have a lot of people that start their trust with like $3,000, because if it's a generational wealth trust, it's all about compounding, right? So we had a married couple last year, February of last year to be specific. They had just married. I think the young lady was 21 and the young man was like 25, right? They had just married. They had no kids. They took a tax return of, I think it was like $3,850. They took that tax return. At the time, the 20-year Kenyan infrastructure, tax-exempt Kenyan infrastructure bond was open. You can Google that bond. It's a bond, right? It's not a blue chip stock. It's a bond. It's a guaranteed ROI of 18.46%. So they got that 20-year bond, and then they're diversified, got a couple other things going as well. And so right now they're set that in 32 years, there's going to be $1.6 million in their trust. All from compounding. They don't have to make another payment ever again. It just has to compound, right? And so, yeah, I mean, 50,000 is fine. Now, the people who pop up with 50,000 are people who are like, I want my kid who's already born, so we got like 16 years or so, I want them to have $1 million, right? So at 18.46%, every 3 years and 4 months or so, the money doubles, right? So if your kid, is already born, they don't quite, maybe they do have 18 years, maybe you want to give it to them at 21, but they're like 4 now or 3 now or whatever, right? And so you say, all right, we got like 18 years, between 18 and 20 years, something like that. So here's 50, right? And every 3 years, it's going to double if you're getting 18.46%, right? Now that was like the highest bond we ever got. So I'm not saying that's standard, but at the same time, what type of bond? You got to Google Kenyan tax-exempt infrastructure bond, and you'll see that bond. It was the one from February of last year. So every 3 months that would double. So or 3 months, 3 years that would double. So in 3 years, the 50 would be 100, right? And then 3 years after that, the 100 would be 200, right? We're only at 6 years, right? 3 years after that, the 200 is now 400. Now we're at 9 years, right? And it's a 20-year bond. 3 years after that, we just crossed into 1.6 million, right? So when you put that bigger money in, it's quicker. If you start with 1,000 or a couple thousand, it's slower. Give me a second. I don't know if you guys can still hear me. TikTok will challenge me. They'll make me do a puzzle to make sure I'm still online. So I don't know if they cut you off or whatever, but TikTok throws those challenges at me where I got to solve a puzzle, I guess, to prove I'm still online. YouTube, you guys, that doesn't happen with YouTube. It's a TikTok thing. But yeah, so yeah, it's definitely enough. Where you hear about people talking about, you're welcome, Foggy. Where you hear about people talking about like, oh, if you ain't got $1 million, then it ain't no point in you having the trust. Those people are talking about asset protection trusts. That's a different type of trust, and I agree with them. If you're going to do an asset protection trust, you probably at the lowest level want between $1 and $10 million in assets, not cash, in assets, right? So that makes sense. This is a generational wealth trust. This is a trust set up so that the kids or the grandkids have generational wealth. So all it does is compound the money over time and then start giving it to the kids at a later point in time. Right, so you can start the smallest amount of money that anybody has ever funded their trust with has been $386. It's 50,000 local Kenyan shillings. So at the time it was $386, and they bought one share because that's the minimum buy-in for a government bond. They bought one share of a high government bond. It wasn't the 18.46, but it was like 16.5, right? So it was good enough. And they bought that. They decided that's all they wanted to do, and that's all they had. And they did that, and that money, now, I haven't checked it lately, but the last time I checked it, it was already over 10 grand. They started with 400, essentially 386. It was already over 10 grand, right? And that was about 10 years ago. So you can start with as little or as much as you want, but the smaller you start with, the longer it takes. So it really just depends on what your family goal is. We've had people who, like, they're looking like crazy generations down, and it's not because they started with like a ridiculously small amount of money. It's just that their family goals are intense, and so, like, they're jumping 4 or 5 generations before this money is ready. And when it's ready, it's going to be $1 billion trust, because you're talking about 150 years of compounding. Now that's not normal. But depending on how these families have set up, their plans and what they want to do, this particular family, the patriarch is a rheumatologist. He has an endowment set up where the members of his family can get paid early. Currently, there's over $1 million in the endowment, and endowment works just like trust, right? So it's just sitting there compounding money, and that endowment is designed for if any member of his family either materially contributes to or cures rheumatoid arthritis, they would get the entire endowment. And he became a rheumatologist because his parents, had severe rheumatoid arthritis and passed in that state. And so it's like he's like obsessed with it, right? And so his whole thing is set up so that, a few generations down the road, if it's not cured, they got billions to throw at a cure, right? And so, and which is really cool. It's not normal, but it's actually really, really cool how he thought that through and how he wants that to be his legacy. So it's just definitely whatever you want. A trust is the most flexible legal document in the world. What are the interest rates today? I just bought an infrastructure bond, what was it, 2 months ago or something like that? I think it was 2 months ago, and it was giving me 14%. So not quite the 18, but still 4% higher than the S&P 500. And it's guaranteed by the government, not, worried about stocks going up and down. So the government would have to disappear. There would have to be a civil war for me not to get my money, in which case I got bigger fish to fry than interest rates. So yeah, they're still pretty decent. When it comes to bonds, high interest rates indicate that there's a high demand for currency, right? So that's what a high interest rate would indicate in the bond market, is that there's a high demand for currency. As that demand goes down, right, the interest rates are going to go down as well. And then typically it flips. So when that flip happens, the stocks start doing better and the bonds start doing worse. There's normally an inverse reaction between the two. So when the stocks are killing it, the bonds are typically low because people don't necessarily want money. They're cool with equity and debt. And when the stocks dip, people now want liquidity. They want money. So then the bonds go up, right? So when you're dealing with a developing nation, that's where you can get those incredible bond rates, right? Because they're developing, so people want capital to deploy for infrastructure projects, which is why it's literally called an infrastructure bond, right? And it's the only bond that's tax exempt. I think right now there's not an infrastructure bond open. That's the other thing. Infrastructure bonds are not always open. So right now, I think there's a fixed bond, which does have taxes. There's a fixed bond open offered by the Central Bank of Kenya right now. Maybe next month they'll get an infrastructure bond again because it's December. So like maybe their Christmas gift to the people is going to be another tax exempt bond. But that's why they're not open all the time, because they're tax exempt. So what's the minimum requirement for a bond? For the Kenyan bonds, it's 50,000 Kenyan shillings. 50,000 Kenyan shillings is roughly $386. Well, so that's a great question. A lot of our people essentially just retire here. Like we just relocated somebody who's only 37 years old, and they got here and immediately retired because of bonds. So what they did was it's called laddering the bonds, right? So when you are compounding the bonds, you're taking the money that the bond pays you and you're reinvesting it, right? And so it's compounding. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And you don't have to reinvest it in a bond. You can reinvest it in something else, but we'll talk about that, I guess, a different lot. So what ends up happening is the bonds pay out twice a year. Okay, so for the clients that want to come here and just like stop working, essentially, we recommend that they have $70,000 to $80,000. Well, this person had their down payment for buying a house saved up, and they were part of that thing where BlackRock was paying over asking price, 200% over asking price for single family homes, so they couldn't buy a house. They had finally saved up enough money to do it. And here comes, venture capital buying up all the houses, all the single family houses in America, right? So now they had this house down payment and they were just fed up. So they came to us. We built them a house here. They did 70,000 US dollars spread across 6 different bonds of at least $1 million local currency, which is about $8,000 per bond, right? 6 of them. So why, right? The reason why is because the bonds pay twice a year. They pay once every 6 months, right? So if you had 1 million shillings in that 18.46 infrastructure bond, that means that you're getting 184,600 of the local currency, right? That's more than locals on average make per year, right? So you would get that, split into 2 payments. Okay, and so maybe January and June, you would get half of that, right? So the laddering strategy is you get 2 bites of the apple. In January, you can see which bonds are open and what the interest rates are. And you can decide like, okay, I'm cool with that interest rate for the next 20 years. You buy a 20-year bond. If not, then you can wait till June. You get 1 more bite at the apple. Now, of course, you can make it multiple years, but then that, it's difficult to make your move, right? So if you're relocating, you get those 2 bites because you want to do it in that same year, right? So once you get all 6 months, you're getting a payment from the government, and especially if they're infrastructure bonds, so they're tax exempt, you're getting a payment from the government guaranteed for the next 20 years every month with just $80,000, right? Now the numbers are actually the same as in the United States. Because what you're actually doing in local currency is you're buying 1 million of this, 1 million of that, 1 million of this. It's just that it doesn't hit you like it would hit a local. Because for a local, 1 million's 1 million. For a local, 1 million feels just like $1 million, right? And so you're buying 6 million, local units worth of these bonds. But for you, that, that's only going to cost you, somewhere between 75 and 80,000. Right, which is much more manageable to not have to work another day in your entire life, right? Or at least for the next 20 years, which by then you'll have it figured out, right? So we have a lot of folks that's how they do their relocation. They get those bonds in place, especially now when the bond interest rates are high. And the lowest interest rate that this guy got was like a 13.7. That's his lowest one. And you just buy more of that, right? And so that you're getting a decent payout. So if you can get 100,000 local currency every month for the next 20 years, guaranteed by the government, you're good. You got, if you got 1.2 million shillings coming to you a year for the next 20 years, and you own a house because it's wrapped into the package. So you own a house. We built you a custom house from the ground up. You sat down with our architects. Our architects designed the house that you want. We bought you your land. We put it in your name, all of that. So you own your land, you own your house. There's no electric bill because the house is typically off-grid solar. So there's no electric bill. You have your own well, borehole, right? So there's no water bill. You have your own biodigester. So it's a septic tank that takes care of itself. So you don't have any sewer bill, right? Most of our clients, the only bill they have is internet. And then if they pick the package that includes a car where we transfer your driver's license to a 10-year driver's license and all that, then you have your car insurance, your gas for your car, and your internet bill. That's it. And most of the houses they build is on agricultural land. Agricultural land has no property tax. So you ain't got no property tax, right? So then, and you're making 100,000 a month sitting on your butt doing nothing, you're good. right? So a little bit of planning, and you can ladder things like bonds, and then take care of yourself in relocation, right? So it just depends on what you want out of things, and what you want to do. We also have folks that come over on investor permits. Investor permits means that they are running their own business. They're the CEO or the founder or the whatever of that business, and the investor permit allows them to make money in Kenya. It's like having your working papers to a certain extent. All right. There is also a work permit, but work permits can only be issued by companies operating in Kenya. So those operating companies have to hire you. It's a W-2 permit. Right. So that's the way that works. So a lot of our clients, so they come here and they stop working and they don't have to work for the next 20 years just because of the Central Bank of Kenya bonds situation. So hopefully that answered your questions on that. Anything else for me on how to make this thing happen? Any other questions from any of you guys on that? If you're trying to type out something real crazy, just throw me a 1, and then I'll wait for your questions. The questions I have, I'll ask in private. Not a problem. Not a problem. Do you have bonds package? Yeah, so what we have is we have relocation packages that can include the bonds. You would pick your own bonds, of course, right? Because then we would be responsible for the outcomes, right? So you would pick your own bonds. Some people will just, read the prospectus and choose which bonds they want. Luckily, bonds are really easy to understand because it's a government offering. Other folks, we can set you up with our banking partners, our local banking partners. Obviously, you would pay them, right? Just like going to a stockbroker in the United States. So there's a payment that you would make with them. But then their internal securities department, like their stockbrokers in the bank, can walk you through the bond picks. There are also funds that our clients get involved in, right? So there's a fund called Mansa X, right? So you can look that up. Mansa X fund. It is giving 20% return on investment currently. There's another fund called Oak Special Fund. Oak, like an oak tree. You can look that up. Oak Special Fund is also giving 20% return on investment currently. There's one called RPRO. That one I forget how to spell. Maybe I'll put it up as a post. So just keep an eye on my stories. But RPRO is another fund. They did 60% return on investment. A lot of our trusts that got involved in that was last year in February, are very happy because after the performance fee, they still made 40%. They made 40% return on investment. So if they gave $100,000 to that investment, they got $140,000 in 1 year. That was crazy. It was so good that they even got investigated. They're like, wait, is this real? And of course, they passed the investigation. So definitely look that up. So yeah, when you're dealing with a developing, economy, all of those numbers are very normal. Actually, if you go back in the United States, with stuff like the 49ers and the gold rush and like when America was developing, those numbers used to hit too. A lot of people got wiped out as well. You know what I mean? Coming late or getting scammed or whatever. But the difference is the internet and the governments that are in place now, where you can really do due diligence on everything now, versus word of mouth from back in the day. So yeah. It's not necessarily Kenya specific. I don't want to make it seem like it is Kenya specific. It's just that Kenya has a really, really strong fintech sector. So that allows you to have kind of what you're used to in mobile apps and blockchain and all of that stuff to tap into a lot of these things because Kenya invented the mobile payment system and the mobile payment infrastructure that all other African countries are utilizing. They invented it in 2007, I believe it was March of 2007. It's called M-Pesa. M stands for mobile. Pesa is money in Swahili, so it's mobile money. If you were in a West African country, it might actually be said mobile money. All of that comes from Kenya. And so Kenya, the population is very, very open to financial banking or electronic banking, whereas most people in Kenya, their entire paycheck and their entire life savings is on their cell phone. I don't know another country that people do that. China is pretty mobile banking friendly as well, but they do not keep all their money on their cell phone. They still, utilize bank accounts pretty regularly. Most businesses in Kenya still, utilize bank accounts. But you'll speak to a lot of Kenyans and they don't have a bank account, but it's not like Black Americans not having a bank account and then paying at the corner store to cash their checks and having the banking desert. No, it's all on their phone. They just don't have a bank account because their phone handles it. All right. Yeah, man, it is pretty fresh, actually. Do you have okay, sorry. The YouTube lettering is so small. Sometimes I'll see it twice. Sometimes I won't see it. If you ask me a question on YouTube and it seemed like I ignored you, just ask it again. The font size on YouTube, I don't know. The font size is super small. And then if you go to TikTok and see this same live on TikTok, my head is super big on YouTube. Like you're zoomed in on YouTube and you move. Like see how you're moving on YouTube? On TikTok, they just see me swaying back and forth, but there's facial tracking on YouTube. So sometimes I just can't see what you guys write. All right, looks like we're good. Looks like all the questions have been asked. If you're in the process of asking a question, just hit enter and I'll wait, and then you can rewrite it even if it's not done being asked, or just hit 1 and I'll wait. I want to do the bonds, but I don't have the 80K. I mean, so it becomes a matter of how are you supporting yourself? How do you want to support yourself? The people who have the 80K have a good life, right? Let me give you an example. Trying to think. We have a security contract with G4S, actually, same G4S as the United States, right? So we have a security contract with G4S. What we pay in that contract, the security guard gets paid $40,000 a month, right? And so each security guard gets paid $40,000 a month. We obviously pay more than that to G4S, and G4S pays a little less so it can make its profit, right? Same as the United States, right? So the security guards are getting paid $40,000 every month, okay? If you have the 80, you put yourself in a position where you're making $100,000 per month, more than double what that person is living off of per month. That's the point of it. The point of it isn't that it's the minimum. The point of it is that you're good, right? So could you live off the same 40,000 that the security guard is living off of? Maybe. You know what I mean? If you're able, to budget the same way they are and whatever, maybe. So have we had people that came in with less than the 80K and did whatever? Sure. Here's the other thing though, right? We've had plenty of people that come in and utilize equity and utilize debt from the U.S. Why? Because the U.S. has a safety net. What's it called? Bankruptcy. So if they move here and they're going to live here permanently, we've had plenty of people utilize equity and debt and whatever from the United States, give a good faith effort in paying it back. You know what I mean? They come here to whatever, they try to make their payments and pay everything back. And if it doesn't work out, they file for bankruptcy. Now their credit is wrecked for 7 years. Who cares? That credit doesn't work here. Nobody sees your credit report in Kenya. So by the time they file for bankruptcy, they have a brand new car because that was part of the package they bought. They have a brand new house because that was part of the package they bought. They have their bonds paying them $100,000 a month, right? Because that was part of the package they bought, and then all the debt that they used to get there from the United States has been wiped out by the bankruptcy court. Right? So it's something that, you got to talk to your own bankruptcy attorney, local bankruptcy attorney about it and all of that stuff. But you want contingency plans. You want a plan of action and a contingency plan. Luckily for Americans, they have those safety nets where they can file bankruptcy, and that can be a contingency plan. So it's just a matter of, we've never seen anybody who wanted to do it that couldn't do it. Might take a bit of sacrifice to do it, and that sacrifice might not be worth it to everybody. So it's not like, if you don't make the sacrifice, no, that's BS, right? Sacrifice might not be worth it to everybody, but everybody who really wanted to do it and it was worth it to them, there was a path to do it if they were American for sure, right? Some other countries don't have safety nets, like even other, first world countries, so to speak, they don't necessarily have safety nets. So, it's different. But in America, Anyone who's wanted to actually do it. We've had people who were like McDonald's workers get it done, right? But it was worth it for them to make the sacrifices that they need to make. It's not always worth it. So please don't beat yourself up, because it's something that you kind of want to do, but you got other obligations and the blah, 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 blah. No, if it's not for you, it's not for you. All I'm saying is that if it is for you, there's definitely a way to do it, right? So if it really is for you and it's something that you want to do, you can absolutely get it done. All right. Anything else before I wrap it up? How long has it been? 1 hour and 25 minutes. And I think on the East Coast, it's like 1 or 2 in the morning now. East Coast of the United States. I'm going to try to start, I don't know, maybe I'll start waking up at midnight or whatever. Because if I get on at 1 a.m. here, I feel like that's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 6 p.m. East Coast. So I'm going to try to like do some late night stuff. It's 1 a.m. there now? Okay. So it's 9 a.m. here in Kenya. So I am going to try to get some earlier stuff done. Because I get it. I know. I get your emails. How come you're always on at midnight? It's just a time thing. All right, guys. Looks like we're good. All right. So I will see you tomorrow at midnight. But we will try to work something out eventually where I'm coming on a little bit earlier for you East Coast guys. But yeah, I'll be live again. If you got any questions, write them down or direct message them to me on whichever platform. You guys are YouTube, you guys are TikTok. Either DM them to me. You may not get me directly. You may get one of my employees. However, I will have that question by the time I go live and be able to answer it. And then tomorrow will be an open Q&A. You guys can even come up and ask your questions, vocally and all of that. I don't know if that's possible on YouTube. And so if it's not, I'll direct you guys to TikTok to be able to come up and ask questions. If it is, then we'll operate in the same way over there. All right, guys. Talk to you guys later. Thanks for having me. And we'll see you tomorrow. Well, tomorrow night for you guys.